Alright, so today we're going to work on some vocabulary from Romeo and Juliet. We're going to learn some words. You've got a handout that I gave you that has 11 words on it, their definitions. So in the first column is the word itself, right? In the second column, that sort of long column, is the definition. And the third column is the act that it's from. And if you don't know what the word is, if you don't remember it, feel free to look through the act and see if you can find it, or see if from reading it you can kind of get a context for it. The first word is adversaries, right? So when we refer to adversaries, we refer to enemies or individuals that you're fighting against. Transgression is the second one. It's to offend someone by breaking a set of rules. And it actually typically means encroaching on somebody's space, right? You transgress against them, you break some barrier or some rule about an individual's space. Chaste means pure or virtuous, without moral flaws, right? Procure means to acquire something or to obtain something, to get something. Wanton is reckless or without concern for people or things. Calamity is a disaster or tragedy. Vile refers to something that is wicked or evil. A dirge is a mournful song or some sort of hymn that's played at a funeral. Distraught refers to stricken with grief, right? So when somebody is distraught, they're just inconsolable. Devise is when you develop a plan. Abhor is strong feelings of hatred. And at this time, just take a moment or two to sort of think through how you remember it being used, think through how it might be used in the story. So for example, with adversaries, we can think of who were adversaries in the story, right? Who were the people that were sort of against each other? It was the Montagues and the Capulets were adversaries, right? Romeo's family and Juliet's family. So take a minute to think about that, and then we'll get, and to review these yourself, and then we'll get into the activity, the first activity that we're going to start with. So what we're going to do is, in pairs with your partner, I'm going to have you fill out what's called a Frere worksheet. I have it right here. I'm going to use my example, which is adversary, and then I'm going to have each of you take one of the words and work together to fill it out yourself. And then afterwards, I'm going to have you present to the rest of the class what you came up with. So here is the Frere model. You see in the center, there's a circle. The circle is where you put your word. Under the first top left square, you have your own definition. And a lot of times when I do this activity, we find that students will try and come up with the best definition that they can academically, or they'll just write the definition here. That's not what we want. Feel free to use slang, to use your own terminology. Feel free to write whatever would define this word for you. Next, and by the way, as part of a definition, if it's some graphical representation, that's cool too. So I would put adversary here, right? And under my definition, I would say that it's just somebody you're not cool with, right? There are people in my life that I'm cool with, and there are people I'm just not cool with. And these are people I'm just not cool with. The adversaries, that's how I would define it, so that's what I'd put there. Then there are characteristics and facts. What I'm going to ask you to do is find out something about the word, right? Find out something about it. It can be the part of speech. It can be its origin. It can be anything really. So what I would put is that an adversary is a noun, and that if you add IAL to the end of it instead of Y, you have adversarial, which makes it an adjective, right? And also I would write that frequently our court system, where we have two people arguing a side, is referred to as an adversarial process. That makes me think of that word. And it's a fact, it's a characteristic of it, that it's typically used in that way. As far as examples go, which is this lower left-hand corner, your examples are going to be things that you think the word applies to, right? So I'm a big fan of sports, right? So anytime my beloved Jayhawks go up against a team, that's their adversary. When they're not up against any given team, then K-State is, of course, our adversary. It can be something like that, something in your own life. If you have a brother or sister that you are just constantly fighting against or fighting with, then your brother or sister might be your adversary. And then under non-examples, you're going to try and think of the best opposites that you can, right? So the opposite of an adversary would be an ally or a friend, right? So you would try and think of a time that there was some sort of alliance or some sort of friendship. We just read The Hunger Games, right? So a non-adversarial relationship would be Peeta and Katniss in The Hunger Games. Any example from popular culture, any example from literature, it doesn't matter. It's just like an example. So I'm going to have you work on that, and then we're going to go around the class, and I'm going to have you introduce your word and give that sort of a description, and teach each other about this. So complete your Frayer model worksheets. We'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll regroup. All right, so now that we've taught each other about the word, we are going to play a little bit of a game, right? So you may have heard of charades. Charades is where you act out a word to try and get somebody to understand what word or to guess what word you're going for, or what word you have. Each of you has been given a card. This is a little bit like charades, but charades with a twist. Each of you has been given a card. On 10 of the cards is a word. On the other 10 are the corresponding definitions. What I want you to do is walk around the room and find the person who has the definition that matches your word or the word that matches your definition. But here's the twist. You can't talk to them at all, right? So you have to act out your definition. You have to act out your word. Don't be afraid to look silly. It's all right. We're all in the same situation, right? So if I had either enemies or individuals that you're fighting against, or the word adversary, I'd walk around and I'd shake my fist and I'd look angry, and I'd try and find the other person who's making similar motions or who's making motions that seem like they'd fit that. And once we all get together, we're going to read the words and then the definitions, and keep in mind, you know what these words mean now. We've gone through it on the handout. Don't take the handout with you, no cheating. And you've just taught each other the words. And then at the end, I'm going to have you put all the words together on the word wall. And the reason I'm going to have you do that is because later on, as time goes on, we're going to look for these words in other books. Also, when we start working on things like grammar and parts of speech, we're going to look at these words and use them for practice. So, everybody get up and move around. So now that we're back, before you leave today, and on your way out the door, I want you all to take out a sheet of paper and pick 3 words. You can look at the word wall, right? That's what it's there for. Pick 3 words and use them in a sentence. Use each of them in their own sentence. Make it something that applies to your daily life, that shows me that you know how to use it. When you're doing this, think of parts of speech. Think of how it was used in Romeo and Juliet. And think of the way that you might use this word in a daily life if you were to use it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a lot. But write those